So in the last video we learned how to write data to an outside file. In this video we'll learn how to read data into the program from an outside file. Now I'm starting with a blank file, alright, and I wanted to save it here in the video because there's something very important going on. So I'll go ahead and hit my save button. I'll put this on in a new folder on the desktop here. I'll call it readDwarves. Okay, and I'll call the program readDwarves. Okay, now very importantly, here's my folder with the file in it that I just saved. I need to make sure that text file, dwarves.txt, which has the data in it that I want to use in this program, is in the same location, the same folder as the program file. So I need to get that dwarves.txt file into this folder. So that's somewhere else. There it is. Okay? So don't forget that step. Otherwise, if the file's not there, the text file isn't in the same location as the program file, you're not going to be able to read data in. You'll probably get some kind of error. Okay, so basically, you saw in our in the program where we wrote data to the outside file, we used a loop, a for loop in fact, to write the file line by line from the contents of an array. All right, we're basically doing the opposite of that. We have a blank program. We don't have an array in sight at the moment. What we're going to do is read those dwarves in and put them into an array that we're creating in the program. Okay, so you may be tempted to dive in and start coding a for loop for x equals 1, 2. Okay, how many? How many times is this loop going to go? Well, you may say, well, it should go 7 times. There are 7 dwarves. Yeah, we could hard code a 7, but in reality, you're never going to be writing a program about the 7 dwarves. In reality, you're going to be drawing data from a file where you don't know how many lines of text are in that file. Maybe it's, all of the employees at a huge company, and people are coming and going every day, and you don't know how many people are listed in that file. And maybe there are thousands and thousands of lines of text in a file, and it's not realistic to expect that you'll be able to count them. Okay, so the for loop, basically what I'm getting at is the for loop isn't going to cut it here, because the for loop, when you set up a for loop, you have to know exactly how many times that loop is going to run before it ever begins running. We set it up to go 1, 2, however many times, and so it's set in stone how many times that loop is going to go before it even starts running. So that's not practical when you're reading data in, because you just don't know how many lines of data you're ultimately going to have. Okay, so what we'll do is use a while loop. That's another style of loop that we've looked at this semester. We haven't seen it in a while though. First things first, let me get a name for the input file. We'll call it input file, and we will say that is dwarves.txt. Another thing you need to be careful of when you have a file name, when you're working with outside files, make sure you're spelling it correctly and not having any typos when you're creating the file in the write program or reading the data in. You could misspell something in the write program and then you spell it correctly in the read program. Well, you're not reading the correct file then, so you need to be careful about your typing there. Okay, so we have the input file isolated, and then what we're going to do, because we're using a while loop, see, the for loop has a built-in loop counter. For x equals whatever, for z equals whatever. Those are loop counters. The while loop does not have a built-in loop counter, so we have to create one ourselves to keep track of the line numbers. So why don't we say line number, and we'll start it at 1, okay? And then before we do anything, before we even think about the loop, we want to read the first line of data from the file, okay? So we'll say, how about input line equals file dot read. And you'll see what I'm getting at when we start the loop. But input line equals file dot read line, and then let's look at the arguments for the read line method. The file path, which we've isolated in the input file variable, that's dwarves.txt, or in this case we'll type input file, and then the line number. Okay, and we have the line number already created in the line above. So we'll say input file and line number. Okay, what this will do, this will get the first line of input into our program. This is going to bring happy into our program, just happy, right? Now, for the while loop, while input line rather, while input line is not equal to nothing, okay, that's I think we mentioned this before, we call that a null string, meaning a string with nothing in it. Okay, meaning if input, we have a double negative. If input line is not equal to nothing, meaning if we have something in there, then we're going to basically put it into the array, increment line number, and then get the next line. Why do we have to, let me end this loop before I forget. Oh, didn't want that. Okay. Why do we set it up like this? Well, like I said, you don't know how many lines of text you're going to have in that input file. So what we have to do is read each line and then make sure there's something there, because at some point the data is going to run out and you're going to read in a line of nothingness, okay? And at that point you want the loop to end. So that's why we set it up like that. The while loop is going to keep looping until it gets to the end and it reads in a line of nothing. Okay, and we're saying this loop should keep going while we've got something, but once we have that nothing, this becomes true, okay? Or this becomes false, rather, and then the loop ends. Okay, so that's why we'll set up the loop like that. The for loop, like I said, just won't cut it because we just don't know how many lines of text that we have. Okay, so if we do in fact have something inside the loop, we're going to create a reference to the array, and we can just use line number is basically going to serve as our loop counter, so we can just use that to move through the array. The first dwarf in happy is going to be in the first element in the array because line number is going to be equal to 1. The second time through the loop, line number, which we're going to increment in just a moment, is going to be 2, and that'll put the second dwarf into the second element, and so on. So we're moving through the array. And then, oh, hang on, it'll be, the contents will be set to whatever the input line is, the dwarf coming in, basically. Okay, and then let's not forget to increment line number. Okay, because we want to move on to the next line in the file. And also the next element in the array, and line number will handle both of those for us. Okay, so we've increment line number, and then we have to get another input line in while we're inside the loop. Well, it's basically this. I can copy this. Okay. All right, so just to recap the mechanism behind the scenes here, we start with line number 1, we get one dwarf into the program, happy. We're saying while that dwarf is not equal to nothing, as long as we've got someone there, let's go ahead and run this code. So we put happy into the first element in the array, we increment line number, and then we get a new line of input into the program. That'll be the next dwarf. Who is that? It's Sneezy. Okay, and then the loop condition is assessed again. While what we have is not equal to nothing, well, we do have something. We have Sneezy, right? So we're going to put Sneezy into the array. Now we're on the second element because line number has been incremented. And then we'll do the whole thing again. So it keeps going. And then when we get to the end, after Dopey's into the array, then we input this line of nothing into our program. Okay, and we're saying keep going while we have nothing. Well, once we have nothing, this becomes false and the loop ends. Okay, so let's just do a quick, if we ran it now, it would work just fine, but we get that quick flash, and there's no feedback. So let's just throw in a quick for loop to make sure we have the data to print the dwarfs for z equals 1, 2. I'm just going to hard code a 7 because the video is probably getting pretty long now at this point. But we would do our, array, get item count and whatnot. So we'll just throw the dwarf name to the text window. And then let's run that. And there they are. They came in from the text file and were populated, or the array was populated with the dwarf names.